The air was still that Sunday morning when I heard the sound of sirens winding down the dirt road toward my cabin. The kind of sound that shatters silence and sets the pulse racing even before you know why. I stepped onto the porch, the smell of pine and lake mist filling the air, and saw flashing blue and red lights reflecting across the water. Karen Daniels stood by the gate, her phone in hand, yelling animatedly at a police officer who had just stepped out of his cruiser. Her son Jake hovered nearby, shifting uneasily, his eyes darting between us. My cabin, perched peacefully on the slope overlooking the pond, suddenly felt like the stage for something ridiculous yet dangerous. I stayed quiet, watching the scene unfold, calm but ready for whatever this was. When the officer approached, his hand hovered near his holster as Karen shouted, "That's him! He's the one threatening our community." I kept my voice even. "Is there a problem, officer?" He hesitated. His gaze flicked over my jacket, where the medals from that morning's veteran ceremony still glimmered faintly in the sunlight. Recognition dawned instantly. His posture straightened, his eyes sharpened, and he snapped into a salute. "Major General Miller, sir." Karen's words died mid-sentence, her face drained of color. That salute, crisp, respectful, absolute, shattered illusion illusion she'd tried to build. For the first time since this war began, the neighborhood's mask cracked. But this wasn't where it started. It began months earlier with a smile that hid a storm. I thought moving into Maple Creek Estates would be a fresh start. Quiet mornings, coffee on the porch, and the hum of the world slowing down. The kind of place where the air smelled of cut grass and the streets were lined with children's laughter. My cabin sat just outside the HOA's jurisdiction, overlooking a calm pond that mirrored the rows of identical homes across the water. I'd served long enough to appreciate peace, to crave stillness. The cabin, with its worn wood and old fireplace, felt like an old friend welcoming me home. For a few weeks, life was exactly what I'd imagined. The rhythm of simple living, the distant sound of lawnmowers, the tranquility of a neighborhood pretending to be perfect. Then came Karen Daniels, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of community standards. She arrived one bright morning with a clipboard in hand, her voice coated in honey, but her eyes sharp enough to cut. "Welcome to Maple Creek," she said, glancing past me toward the cabin. "We take pride in keeping everything orderly here." I thought nothing of it until later that day when I found an envelope in my mailbox, non-compliance warning. It accused me of everything from having the wrong driveway texture to an improperly aligned mailbox. My land wasn't even within HOA limits. I laughed at first, but that laugh didn't last long. Over the next few days, her tone changed. The polite greetings vanished, replaced by veiled threats and sideways glances. Karen didn't like being ignored, and her brand of order didn't tolerate defiance. The HOA's next meeting turned my name into a topic of whispered debate. I wasn't invited, but I heard enough from neighbors afterward how Karen described me as a disruption to the neighborhood aesthetic. The words spread fast, faster than truth ever could. The following week, I noticed HOA board members idling near my property line with clipboards and cameras, snapping photos as if they were documenting a crime scene. They called it recording violations. I called it harassment. Their presence turned my mornings into a watchful routine, coffee in hand, eyes scanning for figures lurking near the trees. A once peaceful place began to feel suffocating. By the end of that month, my mailbox overflowed with letters. Noise complaint, unauthorized structure, wildlife hazard. I realized they were referring to the deer that wandered through my garden every dawn. They filed anonymous reports, called county inspectors, and left warning tags on my gate. At night, I caught headlights flickering near my driveway, cars idling just long enough to make me uneasy. They wanted me gone. I'd seen this kind of control before, the way power corrupts when it hides behind rules. And though this was a quiet suburb, the hostility had the same taste as a battlefield standoff. Patience, pressure, and the slow suffocation of intimidation. Then I decided enough was enough. I started documenting everything: photos, letters, timestamps. When I began restoring my old army Jeep, a project close to my heart, another notice arrived: unauthorized vehicle repair. 2 days later, a county officer showed up, apologetic. "They said you're running a business," he explained. "Looks fine to me." I thanked him, but Karen wasn't done. She called a board meeting claiming I was a community threat. Rumors spread, absurd things, that I had military-grade weapons on my property. One night, Jake, her son, knocked on my door, pale and nervous. "Mr. Miller," he whispered, "my mum says you're dangerous, but I don't think that's true." I saw the fear in his eyes, fear she had planted. That night, I slept light, my instincts sharp again. Something told me the next strike would be bold. It came that Sunday morning. I heard the sirens first, then Karen's voice echoing across the pond. "He's armed. He's threatening our neighborhood." I stepped outside calmly, property papers in hand. 2 police officers arrived, one of them young, uncertain, the other older, composed. Karen stood behind them, her son clutching her arm, tears welling. I could see she had finally crossed the line between control and delusion. I raised my hand slightly, not in fear but in restraint. "You can check for yourself," I said, handing over my papers. The younger officer scanned them, confused. The older one, though, he recognized the medals on my chest. His eyes widened in an instant. The air went still as the older officer straightened and saluted sharply. "Major General Miller, sir." His tone was formal, the kind born from years of service. The young officer followed suit, unsure but respectful. Karen's mouth fell open. "Major... General?" she stammered. I nodded once. "Retired." The world around her collapsed. Her power, built entirely on fear and false authority, dissolved in front of witnesses. The officer turned to her, unimpressed. "Ma'am, you need to stop wasting county resources." She tried to argue, but the salute had already changed everything. In that moment, the truth stood taller than her lies. But justice wasn't done yet. It was merely unfolding. The HOA called an emergency meeting days later, desperate to regain control. Karen stood at the front of the clubhouse, her voice trembling with forced authority. "He's a danger. He's violating regulations," she declared, projecting surveillance footage on the wall, grainy clips from my property, my private footage. I let her finish. Then I opened my own folder, filled with legal documents. "You've just shown evidence collected illegally," I said, placing a cease and desist order on the table. The room fell silent. I handed over county letters confirming her trespassing, misuse of HOA funds, and reports from neighbors she had harassed. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Karen's face drained of color as I produced the final piece, recordings of her voice saying, "We'll make his life miserable until he leaves." Her own words ended her reign. The doors opened and Officer Daniels entered, his tone firm. "Mrs. Daniels, you're under investigation for harassment, unlawful surveillance, and financial misconduct." Cameras flashed, neighbors whispered. Justice had arrived, not with fury, but with calm precision. The days that followed transformed Maple Creek. The once feared HOA crumbled under the weight of lawsuits and resignations. County officials dissolved its power entirely. For the first time in years, people laughed again, waved again, and stopped looking over their shoulders. The community reorganized into a volunteer group. No titles, no threats, just neighbors helping neighbors. Jake came by one afternoon, older and quieter. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "She thought she was doing the right thing." I looked out at the pond, its reflection calm and unbroken. "Sometimes," I said, "control makes people forget what right even looks like." The grass grew back over the tire marks near my driveway. The air felt lighter, freer, and peace, real peace, returned. Months later, I ran into Karen in the grocery store. She looked smaller, humbled. "You were right," she said softly. "I went too far." I nodded once. "We all think we're the hero," I told her. "But sometimes the story changes." She smiled weakly and walked away. Back at the cabin, I rebuilt the garden and finished restoring my Jeep. The pond shimmered under the evening sun, and children played along the shore, the same place once filled with tension, now alive with laughter. The old HOA sign at the neighborhood's entrance, half buried in weeds, still stood, a reminder of how fragile control can be when it forgets compassion. As the wind rustled through the trees, I thought about everything that had happened, how justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and when it does, it changes everything.